family betrayed me. I'm Clara, 35, an art teacher in Maine, taught by my grandmother Margaret to cherish chamomile tea and stained glass light. 2 weeks after her death, her promise that her 19th century cottage filled with roses would be mine crumbled. Clutching a courier-delivered envelope on her worn steps, I faced a chilling truth. What did my family hide? The lawyer had just finished reading the will. In it, my grandmother had clearly left the house to me, but before I could even react, my mother, Ellen, casually reached for the set of keys on the table, as if it was her given right. "I know you're emotional, but let's be realistic, Clara," she said in a voice as sweet as syrup but cold as ice. "This house needs too many repairs. Your father and I just want to spare you the burden." I looked at her, then at my father, Henry, who simply lowered his head, avoiding my eyes, his hands nervously clasped together. They were talking about my grandmother's house, the place I grew up in every summer, like it was just another convenient item to be boxed away. "I don't need to be protected," I said, my voice trembling. "Grandma left me this house. It's in the will. I have the right." A scoff came from the corner of the room. My brother Evan leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, not even trying to hide his mocking smile. "Clara, do you even know how high the property taxes are here with your teacher's salary? Holding on to this house is just a fantasy." The scent of roses still lingered faintly in the air. Less than 2 months ago, Grandma and I were sipping tea in the back room, and she was telling me about her first love with a gentle smile. And now, I was watching my family tear apart her memory like it was a pile of clearance sale leftovers. "You can't do this," I blurted out, my voice nearly choking. "Actually," my sister Isabel cut in, face void of any remorse. "Mom and Dad have legal authority over the estate. They have power of attorney. The transaction's already been made." I felt the blood drain from my face. "What transaction?" "We found a buyer," my mother replied quickly, adjusting her cashmere scarf like everything was already settled. "It's a great offer, above market value. The paperwork is signed. There's nothing more to discuss." I tightened my grip on the envelope in my hand. I hadn't opened it yet because, per instructions, I had to wait until after the reading of the will. It had been sent by Grandma's lawyer, and she had written, clearly, "Only open after everything has been said." "Get out of my grandmother's house," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but the whole room seemed to freeze. "Don't be dramatic, Clara," my father spoke for the first time, his voice dry. "We're still a family." I let out a hollow laugh that echoed through the heavy silence. Families don't do this to each other. They left the house one by one, but I could see relief in their eyes. My mother was the last to leave, but she paused at the doorway, turning back to say with a cryptic tone, "We're meeting the buyer tomorrow evening to hand over the keys. You should come. It'll be better for you to face reality." When the door closed, I stood there in complete silence. I sank into Grandma's favorite velvet armchair and slowly opened the envelope. Inside was a carefully folded piece of paper and a small silver key. "My dearest Clara, if you're reading this, then everything has happened just as I expected. But don't worry. I've left you something they don't know about. It will help you reclaim what's rightfully yours. Check beneath the 4th brick on the garden wall, the one with the carved dove. Love always finds its way if you have enough faith." My heart pounded. Grandma always said the truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs someone brave enough to listen. It seemed she had prepared for every possibility, and now it was my turn to act. I stood up, still clutching the key. The sun was setting behind the trees, casting soft amber light across the house walls. This house hadn't finished telling its story, and I would be the one to listen to it until the very end. It was already dark when I stepped into the garden, holding a small flashlight and the silver key Grandma left me. The crisp, late-season air made me shiver, but my heart burned with determination. Each step on the cobblestone path took me back to childhood summers, watering plants with Grandma, picking up fallen petals, listening to her speak of the things grown-ups hide in places no one notices. I stopped at the old stone wall at the edge of the garden, the one where she used to sit quietly and embroider. Running my fingers over the bricks in the dim light, I searched for the carved dove. It took a few minutes, but at last my fingers brushed against an oddly smooth curve, just as she'd written, a brick with a dove spreading its wings. I gently pried with my fingertip, and to my surprise, the brick came loose easily. Inside was a small iron box wrapped in antique lace fabric. My heart pounded. I opened it to find a thick bundle of documents tied with a red ribbon, a handwritten drive, and a handwritten note. My dear Clara, they will try to take everything from you, but they don't know I was one step ahead. Inside these pages is the truth that the law cannot ignore. Take them to my lawyer, Elizabeth Moore. Trust no one else but her. Love you, Grandma Margaret. Without hesitation, the next morning I drove to Elizabeth's office, a small but elegant building in the heart of Bangor. Miss Moore was a woman in her late 40s. Her blonde hair neatly pinned back, and her sharp eyes looked like they could read every thought. When I placed the documents on her desk and explained everything, she stayed silent for a long moment, then began flipping through the first few pages. Less than 15 minutes later, her expression changed noticeably. Clara, she said, her voice serious. Your grandmother was incredibly thorough. This document is a legally valid codicil to the original will. It was notarized 9 months before her passing. I straightened in my seat. Does it say anything specific? She nodded. A very clear clause. The house cannot be sold without your direct signed consent validated by a third-party signed consent verified by a designated third party before. This clause was written to override any decision in case of a conflict of interest. I held my breath. But they said the deal was done. They gave me a copy of the sale agreement with my signature. Elizabeth silently flipped another page, then slid a photocopy of the contract across the desk to me. The signature at the bottom bore my name, but I instantly recognized that it wasn't my handwriting. The C was in that distinct angular style my mother always used. I shivered. Can it be proven as forged? I asked, my voice dropping low. Absolutely, Elizabeth replied. If you have proof you weren't here on the date the papers were signed, this goes beyond an unauthorized sale. This is signature fraud, and the legal consequences are serious. I nodded, my hand tightening. I was in Boston that day. I have the train ticket, B&B receipts, even social media posts. I have everything. She gave a slight smile. Then we have the upper hand. Just then, my phone buzzed. A message from Isabel. Mom knows what you're doing. Don't push yourself out of the family. I held the screen up to Elizabeth. She just smirked. A text move from someone who's scared. You should be prepared. When faced with the truth, some people react more extremely than you'd expect. We started making a plan immediately. I would gather all my proof of being out of town that day and keep Grandma's documents secret until Elizabeth confirmed my legal ownership. But I didn't expect that by mid-noon when I returned to Grandma's house, I'd find the locks had been changed. On the pine door was a crudely taped note. No entry, property now under buyer's management. I stood there, my hands clenched inside my jacket pockets, while inside me a quiet fire of resolve was beginning to burn. Did they really think a changed lock could erase everything Grandma left for me? I pulled out my phone and texted Elizabeth. They changed the locks, but I'm not backing down. Ready for the next step? I had never felt more certain. This wasn't just about a house anymore. This was a wake-up call that sometimes the people closest to you are the very ones willing to erase you from their lives if it gains them something. And I, Clara Thompson, wasn't going to let that happen. On Wednesday morning, I returned to Elizabeth Moore's office. She was already waiting, eyes sharp with determination as if ready for a legal battle since sunrise. The buyer's name is Michael Larson, she said as I sat down. Real estate investor from Burlington. He wired a deposit and plans to take possession of the house in 5 days. I frowned. Does he know I didn't sign the sale papers? Elizabeth shook her head. There's no indication he's aware, but we'll find out. I've arranged a meeting with him here this evening. You should be there too, at 6:00 p.m. Michael walked in, tall, polished, wearing a navy blazer, crisply pressed, with the calm confidence of someone used to being in control. But when his eyes met mine, that confidence wavered for a brief second. I'm guessing you're Clara? He asked, taking a seat beside Miss Moore. I nodded. My grandmother's house. The one you're trying to buy. Elizabeth opened the file and slid the sale contract in front of him, for Larson. This is the contract you signed with Clara's family, but there's a serious issue. The signature representing the legal owner has been forged. Michael furrowed his brow, his eyes scanning the signature. Is it hers? I spoke up. That signature isn't mine, and on the day the contract was signed, I was in Boston. I have solid proof. A moment of silence passed. Michael looked me straight in the eye, then turned to Elizabeth. You're saying forged? They signed it for her? Not just forged, Elizabeth replied firmly. They violated a notarized codicil to the will. It clearly states that the house cannot be transferred without Clara's direct consent, verified by me. This contract is entirely void. Michael leaned back in his chair, clearly shocked. They told me you had agreed, that you were too busy to attend the signing. I gave a faint smile. They also told me the house was just a burden that no one wanted to keep. Michael paused, his gaze slowly shifted into one of suspicion. I don't like being caught in the middle of lies. If this contract is valid, I want no part of it. Elizabeth gave a small smile. We're not asking you to proceed with the deal, but if you're willing to clarify what you were told by the sellers, it could be legally significant. He thought for a moment, then nodded. I've got nothing to hide. I'll cooperate. But you should know, over the past few weeks, your mother kept pressuring me to sign quickly. She said there was a financial urgency, and if I delayed, she'd go with another buyer. I looked at Elizabeth. She was trying to rush everything before I found out. Michael nodded, pulling out his phone. I've got the whole chain of emails and text. I can print them and sign a statement if needed. Elizabeth jotted down notes in the file. We'll need everything, both content and timestamps, especially anything that mentions Clara. Michael picked up a folder he had brought. I also have this. There's a line where she says, "We are the rightful heirs. The girl won't be able to interfere. This deal is for the good of the whole family." I felt a tightness in my chest. A short sentence, but calculated and cold. To them, I was nothing more than an obstacle in their transaction. Michael looked up, his gaze softening. I'm truly sorry. If I had known something was wrong, I wouldn't have gotten involved. Nodded. It's not your fault. You were just used like I was. Elizabeth gathered the documents, arranging them neatly. Thank you, Michael. Your testimony and evidence will be extremely helpful. He stood, shaking hands with us. If you need anything else, just reach out. I don't want to help anyone take something that doesn't belong to them. Once he left, the office fell silent again. I leaned back in my chair, my eyes still on the file on the desk. So, they really went this far? I said slowly, forging my signature, lying to the buyer, pushing me out of my own grandmother's house. Elizabeth looked at me, her expression resolute. And now it's time for you to take everything back. They didn't count on you fighting back. I pressed my lips together, then stood. I won't let my grandmother down. They think a few documents can erase everything, but they forgot one thing. Elizabeth raised an eyebrow. What? I turned to face her. That a true legacy doesn't lie in property, it lies in the truth. And I would be the one to bring that truth into the light. That evening, I got a call from someone I never expected to take my side. Isabel, my sister, always the perfect replica of our mother. Composed, polished, and forever defending our parents without question. But her voice on the phone didn't sound like the usual Isabel. It was hesitant, uncertain. Clara, can we meet? This is important. I recognized where. Don't tell anyone in the family. 45 minutes later, I walked into the cafe with a swirl of mixed emotions. Caution, anger, and a hint of curiosity. Isabel was already seated in the corner, hands wrapped around a full teacup, her eyes fixed on the window as if avoiding reality. When she saw me, she stood quickly, pulling out a chair for me. Start with the truth, I replied coldly. Isabel took a deep breath. I went through some papers in Mom's drawer. There are things that don't match the will you and the lawyer have. I froze. What do you mean? They altered documents, Mom. Mom has a fake version of the will. And there's a financial file, too. Shady loans, questionable bills. Clara, I think Dad's company is under investigation. They need money fast. That's why they tried to sell Grandma's house. It felt like the air froze in my lungs. I'd suspected it, but hearing it from my own sister was still a shock. And the signature on the house sale contract? Isabel looked at me, guilty. Evan signed it. Mom convinced him. It said it was the only way to save the company from collapsing. I clenched both fists. They think forging legal documents is acceptable? Isabel didn't answer, but her silence spoke volumes. There's more, she continued. They're planning to meet with a new buyer at the Harbor Inn next Thursday night, 7:30 p.m., room 512. They're trying to renegotiate, offering additional assets in the deal. I frowned. What assets? I'm not sure, but Mom mentioned high-value items. I think it's the things Grandma kept hidden. Maybe paintings, jewelry, or something important you haven't discovered yet? I nodded slowly, the puzzle pieces clicking into place in my mind. Why are you telling me all this? I asked. Isabel bit her lip. Because I can't take it anymore. Mom's always wanted everything to go her way ever since we were kids. But this time they've gone too far. Grandma left that house to you, and I know she did it because she believed you were the only one who could protect it. I looked at her, for the first time seeing an unguarded honesty in her eyes. Do you want to help? I asked quietly. Isabel nodded decisively. Yeah. I pulled out my phone and texted Elizabeth. In a secret meeting at Harbor Inn, room 512, 7:30 p.m. Thursday. Bring recording equipment. Seconds later, the reply appeared. Received. Ready. I meet you before the meeting. I looked up at Isabel. Thank you. Even if it's late, you made the right choice. She gave a soft, bittersweet smile. Grandma once told me, choosing what's right late is better than never at all. Maybe it's time I finally listened to her. That Thursday evening, Elizabeth and I arrived at the Harbor Inn right on time. On the 5th floor, we rented room 511, directly next to where the secret meeting would take place. Elizabeth installed the recording device into the wall outlet, and I pressed my ear against the thin wall, listening as if waiting for the truth to come pouring out. My mother's voice came first, cold and calculated. We only have tonight. The auditors will go through the books on Friday. If the money isn't in the business account, they'll start digging. A man's voice followed. Probably my father's. We can't let everything fall apart because of that girl. My mother exhaled sharply. Clara won't know a thing. The buyer agreed to keep quiet if we turn over all of Margaret's hidden valuables. I held my breath. Valuables? Behind the built-in cabinet in the study, Mom continued. Margaret had a collection of pre-war jewelry worth hundreds of thousands. I looked at Elizabeth. She had recorded the entire exchange, and her eyes flashed with satisfaction. We've got what we need, she whispered. Now we just bring it to light. I nodded, my heart pounding. My family had thrown away every moral line to hold on to something that no longer belonged to them. But they'd forgotten one thing. I was no longer the easily led little girl I used to be. I was the one Grandma trusted, and I wouldn't let her down. The voices from room 512 carried through the paper-thin wall. Each word cut through my memories of family like a blade. My mother spoke again, this time without her usual calm tone. We can't let anyone discover the collection. If they trace the origin, it'll link back to all the old transactions. If Clara finds them, everything falls apart. I turned to Elizabeth, her eyes lighting up again. She quickly scribbled notes, each stroke bold and deliberate. That collection? What is it really? I whispered. Elizabeth shook her head. We'll find out soon enough. On the other side of the wall, my father chimed in. Are you sure they're still in the house? Margaret might have moved them somewhere else. No, my mother responded quickly. She didn't have the time and she thought she could hide them longer. But I know that house better than anyone. The study room, the wall behind the desk. There's a hidden compartment. I heard footsteps, papers shuffling, then the sound of water being poured, followed by a new male voice, clearly the buyer's representative. But I need assurance. If those are truly antique jewelry, their value is no less than $1 million. I won't transfer anything until they're verified. My mother spoke slowly. You'll get the jewelry, but you are not to contact anyone connected to Clara. She no longer has any rights. Elizabeth motioned with her hand, then pointed at the clock. Almost 8:00. She pulled out her phone and whispered, We've got enough on tape. We need to leave before they wrap up. We slipped out of the hotel through the side elevator, unnoticed. On the way back to the office, I didn't say a word. I just held tight to the bag containing the recording evidence of a crime covered up for years by my own flesh and blood. Once we were back at the office, Elizabeth immediately extracted the audio file and saved it onto 3 separate devices. She wasn't taking any risks. "Do you think my grandma knew about all this beforehand?" I asked, curled up in a chair, eyes gazing out the nighttime window. Elizabeth nodded. "Without a doubt. Margaret didn't revise her will. She deliberately added a clause to block the sale. That tells me she knew exactly what they were planning." I swallowed hard. "And she hid the jewelry inside the wall. Because if they were discovered, your entire family could face investigation for tax evasion, money laundering, or worse, trafficking undocumented artwork," Elizabeth said. She opened a drawer and pulled out a list. "Your grandmother had been in contact with an appraiser named Laura Bennett. This is a handwritten letter she wrote 9 months ago. It lists several jewelry pieces possibly belonging to a collection that's been missing since the 1930s. I shivered. She knew what they were doing, and she tried to save everything in silence. Elizabeth looked at me for a long moment, then gave a small smile. "And she believed you would be the one to protect that legacy when the time came." The next morning, we arrived at my grandmother's house with a court-issued authorization and a temporary protection order to prevent anyone from interfering with the property under legal dispute. The first person we saw was my brother Evan, standing awkwardly at the front door, a set of keys fumbling in his hand. "What are you doing here?" I asked, stepping in front of him. Evan froze, his eyes darting from Elizabeth back to me. "Mom said she needed something checked in the study. I was just following instructions. And the forged signature on the sale contract. Were you just following instructions then too?" I asked, my voice catching in my throat. Evan bit his lip. "I'm sorry, Clara. I know I messed up, but everything was falling apart. The company, the debts were piling up. Mom said if we didn't come up with the money, there'd be an investigation. And the solution was selling off Grandma's last memory." I shook my head. "You had a choice. And you picked the wrong side." Elizabeth stepped forward, holding out the court order. "From this moment on, all activity on this property requires written approval from Clara. Any attempt to enter, remove, or alter anything inside is a legal offense." Evan lowered his head and handed over the keys. I took them and stepped into the house with a strange feeling. The soft scent of roses was still there. Grandma's portrait still hung in the center of the room. But this time, I wasn't walking in as her granddaughter. I was walking in as the keeper of the truth. We headed straight for the study where the walls were lined with vintage books and muted sunlight filtered through the windows. I ran my hand along the oak trim behind the third desk, the spot my mother mentioned during the meeting. A soft click echoed. A small compartment opened behind the paneling. Elizabeth shone a flashlight inside. There were 3 rolled-up jewelry cases in protective tubes, a metal box engraved with Margaret T., and a sealed envelope with a blue wax stamp. I picked up the envelope, my fingers trembling. On the front, in my grandmother's handwriting, were the words, "For Clara, when you're ready to face the truth." I opened it. Inside was a single note written in her familiar script. "It's not the jewelry, but the story behind them that must be protected, and the truth, no matter how long it's buried, will always find the light." I looked up, my throat tight with emotion. Elizabeth smiled. "We're going to bring that truth into the light." And I knew this was only the beginning. 5 days later, we submitted all the evidence we had gathered to the Bangor City Police. Elizabeth personally presented the audio recording of the meeting, a copy of the forged contract, and the list of valuable jewelry my grandmother had hidden. Work suspected to be linked to an illegal art trafficking network dating back to the 1980s. The lead investigator, Mr. Thomas Reed, was calm but had eyes that missed nothing. After reviewing the file and listening to the entire recording, he simply said, "There's enough here to open a criminal investigation, and if the jewelry matches this list, this won't just be a civil matter." That very evening, he requested we accompany him to the Seaside Hotel, where my parents were scheduled to meet the buyer for the transfer of additional assets. The hidden jewelry collection. Isabel concealed a recording device in her jacket pocket, and I had my phone already set to video mode. Isabel came with us, clutching a folder of documents she had quietly copied from our mother's office. She was the first in our family to break the silence, and now she wanted to see it through. We stepped into the meeting room on the 10th floor, just as my mother was pulling a velvet-wrapped jewelry case from a suitcase. The unfamiliar man standing across from her, likely the collector, reached out to touch the case, but froze the moment he saw us. My mother turned around, her face going pale the instant she spotted me, Elizabeth, and Isabel entering. "What is this?" she asked, voice calm, but her hand tightening around her purse strap. "This," I said, raising my phone, "is the truth. And this time, it's not staying hidden." My father stepped forward, trying to block me. "Clara, you're walking into trouble. This isn't what you think." "Isn't what I think?" I scoffed, then turned to the buyer. "Did you know the pieces you're planning to buy are listed as missing since 1945, according to records from the International Art Loss Registry?" The man jerked his hand back. "Excuse me?" Elizabeth pulled out a letter of authentication from expert Laura Bennett. "The jewelry you're holding is one of several reported missing from the private collection of a Dutch family. If you accept it, you could be prosecuted for participating in an illicit transaction." Just then, police burst into the room. Inspector Reed led the team, instructing everyone to stay put, and immediately began seizing all jewelry, documents, and related devices. My parents were stunned while Isabel stood beside me, her gaze fixed on her mother. "I used to think you did this for the family, but I was wrong. You were only trying to save your own power." My mother met her eldest daughter's eyes, her voice hardening. "I did everything for you." "No," I cut in. "You did everything to hide the truth, that this family was built on things no one dared to talk about. But today, that ends." My father dropped his hands and slowly sank into a chair, as if all strength had drained from him. "Your mother didn't lie," he whispered. "We made mistakes, but it was to protect the company. Our name—" Inspector Reed interrupted. "Mr. Thompson, we have evidence that your company used fake invoices, shipped counterfeit art to Asia, and received authentic works through family Raksent First in Imboy Remopler." Suddenly, the door swung open. Evan, my brother, entered with a tense expression. He looked at no one but me. "Clara," he said, "I'm here to make a statement. Mom and Dad didn't act alone. There are other partners involved. I have documents." Elizabeth stepped forward to collect the stack of papers from him. I looked at Evan, the same person who once forged my signature, and asked quietly, "Why the change of heart?" He sighed. "Because I don't want to keep pretending. Everything Grandma did, she did for us, and me. I only ever listened to Mom. But now, I realize that silence is a form of complicity too." Inspector Reed accepted his statement and asked Evan to stay for a full report. The jewelry buyer left the room shortly after, leaving behind all documents and confirming his willingness to cooperate with the investigation. As police began collecting evidence, I walked over to my mother. She was still standing, arms crossed, her eyes not angry, just tired. "Why, she asked softly. I looked her in the eye. "Because Grandma trusted me. Because I never saw that house as a possession, I saw it as memory, as the last proof of honesty in a family that got too comfortable hiding things." She didn't say another word. Elizabeth signaled for me to head out as officers began sealing the jewelry crates. Isabel gave my hand a light squeeze as we exited the hotel, and Evan followed silently behind, his eyes fixed on the first signs of everything crumbling. But inside, I knew this wasn't collapse. It was awakening. And I wasn't going to let it be silence again. 3 months after the Seaside Hotel raid, my life changed completely. My parents, Ellen and Henry Thompson, were sentenced to 7 and 9 years in prison, respectively. After agreeing to cooperate with authorities and expose the full scope of the illegal jewelry dealings they'd been part of under the direction of federal investigators, more than 12 others were arrested, including 4 major business partners of my family's textile company. Thompson & Sons, once my father's pride, was now officially dissolved. The remaining legal assets after liquidation, including warehouses, vans, and retail properties, were redistributed by the court, with the majority returned to the estate of my grandmother, Margaret Thompson. I was formally declared the sole heir to her entire personal estate, including the old house and the jewelry collection, which had been appraised at over $4,200,000 by the insurance agency. I stood in the living room as the late evening sunlight streamed through the patterned glass windows, casting reflections on the freshly painted cream walls. Isabel was dusting the bookshelf, and Evan was closing up the old metal chest he had once planned to hide the jewelry in. In the midst of all the loss, the 3 of us, who once had nothing left to hold us together, had rediscovered what my grandmother had spent her life protecting. Family isn't built on possessions, but on truth. I fixed the back door, Evan said as he passed me, his voice much softer than before. I nodded with a smile. Thanks. This house feels like it's been waiting for that. Isabel stood upright, her hand resting on an old book embroidered with our grandmother's name. She left us more than we realized. I nodded. Not just jewelry or property. She left us a chance to start over, this time with no more secrets. Every day in this house helped me understand why she kept everything here. Beneath the old hardwood floors were the footprints of our childhood. Above on the ceiling still remained the faint crack. She once said, "Look like a heart if you stand at just the right angle." And in every photo frame, every book, were traces of a woman who lived ahead of her time, quietly fighting to protect values more lasting than wealth. On Thursday afternoon, lawyer Elizabeth stopped by with the final court confirmation. The house, all its contents, and the insurance settlement from the jewelry were now legally mine. She placed the file on the coffee table, the same spot where my grandmother used to sit every afternoon, brewing tea and knitting pillowcases. "Congratulations, Clara," Elizabeth said gently. "You kept your promise to her." I opened the file, scanning the blue seals and signatures. No more disputes, no more forgeries, no more fearing tomorrow. I don't know what to say except, "Thank you," I replied, my heart light as if a boulder had been lifted from my chest. There's one more thing you should know," she said, pulling out a small envelope. "This came from the archives, your grandmother's last letter, dated 2 weeks before she passed." I took the envelope and opened it. Her familiar handwriting appeared on ivory stationery. "My dearest Clara, if you're reading this, then the secrets have likely come to light. I never wanted you to grow up with a heart full of doubt, but sometimes the truth needs time to rise. Keep this house as a place of healing, not just for you, but for all who've ever lost their way. I love you, Grandma." I folded the letter, my eyes stinging, but my heart strangely at peace. Just then, the doorbell rang. It was James, the former jewelry buyer, now an unexpected ally through the entire ordeal. "Hi, Clara," he smiled, holding a carefully wrapped frame. "I stopped by to return this. I think it belonged to your grandmother." I unwrapped the package. It was the small oil painting she had hung in her bedroom, autumn forest scene. I'd always assumed it was a print, but now, looking closely, each brushstroke was clear. "This was the original," James spoke gently. I had it appraised. Turns out it was the debut piece of a well-known female artist from the 1910s. No signature because your grandmother was her close friend. I laughed softly. She hid talent better than she hid old jewelry. We hung the painting back in its original place, right above the mantelpiece. The house felt alive again, this time without lies, only love, memories, and a new beginning. As the golden glow of sunset filtered through the windows, I stood on the porch with Isabel and Evan. 3 fractured pieces slowly stitching back together with the invisible thread of forgiveness. "Grandma was right," I said quietly. "We can lose everything, but as long as we still have trust, we can rebuild." Isabel squeezed my hand. Her hands gave a small nod. This house had once buried secrets. Now it held the most precious things of all: truth, love, and family. Just as Margaret always hoped. My story taught me that the truest legacy isn't wealth or rare jewelry. It's the courage to uphold truth. Despite betrayal by those closest to me, I, Clara, stood firm, not for vengeance, but to honor the values my grandmother Margaret lived for. Her house became more than property. It's now a haven of healing, new beginnings, and proof that truth prevails. Readers have shared how Clara's fight against family deception mirrors their own struggles with hidden truths or broken trust, inspiring many to reclaim their voice. What does Clara's journey spark in you? Have you ever had to confront betrayal to protect what's right? Share your story in the comments. We'd love to hear it. Follow for more heartfelt tales of family, resilience, and truth.